When I went to college and started living in a dorm, my folks moved into a houseboat. Friends of theirs owned a house with waterfront land and allowed them to keep it docked there. I came home every other weekend to visit and learned being on the boat was just like inside a camper, a tight squeeze with very little private space. When I was there, I had to sneak outside to duck behind some fencing enclosing a picnic area to smoke a little weed. During one visit, as I'm toking away at 1 a.m., I hear some weird noises near me. Sounded like a combination of grunts and that clicking sound you can make with your tongue. I stick my head around the fence to get a good look. There were at least six of them, and I thought they were people, but something wasn't quite kosher. It makes no sense, but something inside me said, don't let them know you're here. Not making a sound, I secretly watched them. I'm no forensic artist, but will do my best with a description. I really couldn't tell you how tall they were because each one was squatting down like a frog. Guessing, I'd say they're about the same size of an average man squatting down. Their arms were very skinny and so long, even with the elbows bent, their reach was far as they picked the ground around the picnic table. Wasn't close enough to see the features of their faces, but could make out strong jawlines with prominent chins. Couldn't even tell you if they were wearing clothes. It was too dark. I was still trying to convince myself it was a hallucination, a trip through the weird because of the weed, when almost on cue, they all stopped and looked towards the swampy wilderness behind the house. Coming faintly from the woods was the same clicking and grunt noises. It sounded far away, in a single line, and I swear, while still squatting, they moved very quickly and jumped over a 3-foot fence with room to clear. How can anyone jump a fence that high from a squatting position? It seemed impossible. I must have made some kind of sound, for the last one turned around and looked right at me. Its eyes had a bright yellow reflection. I ducked back fast, praying, please don't see me, please don't see me. I can't explain this feeling of fear that was paralyzing my body. I don't know how long I stood there before getting the guts to go running for the boat and making sure the door was locked behind me. Asked my folks the next morning if they had any encounters with the wildlife. Besides an occasional alligator or raccoon sighting, nothing out of the ordinary. When you don't accept the unnatural, one tries to come up with a believable explanation. So I convinced myself it was the weed. What I saw was just my imagination. A couple of weeks later, I was back and had decided to go out onto a raised deck overlooking the water for a smoke after Mom and Dad went to bed. I didn't know the light was motion sensitive. When the bright house bulb comes on, it blinds me and I trip over one of the deck chairs. Quickly righting it up and sitting down, I don't move a muscle, waiting for the damn thing to turn off. After several agonizing minutes, it shuts off and plunges everything back into darkness. Making sure the disturbance did not wake anyone, I light the joint and sit back. Several minutes went by when, feeling a tickle on my leg, I brush at it. Bugs are everywhere. That tickle again on my leg, and this time I slap hard, hoping I smashed the little bugger. While in my purple haze, I hear that weird clicking, followed by a couple of low grunts coming from below me. I slowly stand up and tiptoe around the edge of the deck so not to set off the motion sensor, and peer over the railing. I can't see anything but the dark. Seconds later, something brushes against my leg, scaring the crap out of me. This time, I couldn't stop the involuntary squeak of fear that came out of my throat and grabbed one of the chairs to use it as a shield in front of me. The light turns on and something big dives down the deck stairs, knocking over potted plants on its way. There is no way the weed knocked over stuff. Something was there, something strange. What scared me the most is one of those things got close enough to me to touch my leg, and I didn't even know it was there. I don't know what it was or what it wanted, and I had no desire to find out. Even though I worried about them now, my weekend trips to my folks' houseboat slowed down to once a month, and when there, I didn't dare go outside after dark. I never saw or heard the things again, but to this day, the memory still bothers me. Hi, I'm Shirley, and here is my ghost story. My husband, Jerry, was reaching retirement age and decided it was time to downsize. His work had taken up most of his time over the years, a lot of it out of state and away from me. He wanted a simpler life, to have more us time. Even though it was sweet of him, I just wasn't too keen on moving somewhere less populated. The city life had a hold on me. Going rustic was the plan, but it took me by complete surprise when he showed me the cabin he wanted to buy. An original 2-bedroom, 1-bath log cabin. It was over 200 years old, built in 1789, but had been fixed up with all the modern amenities. The electricity came from 2 large solar panels sitting in the yard and propane gas. It was definitely out there. Besides sitting on 25 acres of land, the nearest town had only about 7,000 people living in it. It would be at least a 2-hour drive to find the nearest Walmart. As we walked about the place, I could see his eyes lighting up and a smile that never stopped. In my heart, I knew he was in love with the cabin. Because he wanted it so badly, I wanted it. That is love. As we went through the purchasing process, I questioned why the owner was selling it after fixing it up, but never really got an answer. 2 months later, I said goodbye to my beloved city and we moved into our new home. Because I didn't downsize enough, it was taking time to sort through all the boxes to pick out knickknacks to keep out. It was a mess. So at first, I didn't think anything was unusual when the boxes were being moved from one room to another. I thought it was Jerry. When I complained to him about it, he had no clue what I was talking about. He hadn't moved any boxes inside the house. Must be overtired, I thought to myself. and blew it off as that. It was our second week there, and I was in the living room going through my stuff when, clear as a bell, I hear a rough, raspy sounding male voice say right behind my left ear, "You are pretty." My heart jumped into my throat with fear, and I spin around. No one is there. So sure someone is in the house with me, I grab the fireplace poker and go from room to room, looking under beds and in closets. I decided not to tell Jerry, convincing myself it had been just some noise that sounded like words. A few days had gone by, and I was in the spare bedroom where it had become the catch for all, and thinking to myself where to start, when a female voice with a very strict, disapproving manner of speaking says behind me, "Clean up the house for me." As with the last time, I turn around and no one is there. Now I know that was real. That evening, I talked to Jerry and asked if he has heard or seen anything out of the ordinary. Claiming he has heard nothing, I keep my mouth shut. A few days had gone by with no more voices, and I was able to relax again. Taking a bath one night, I heard the same rough sounding male voice repeat, "You're so pretty." It didn't sound like a compliment, more of a sick threat. Fear made all the hair on my arm stand up, and I quickly grabbed my robe, put it on. This time I talked to Jerry and tell him about the voices I heard. He does not go for any paranormal crap, as he puts it, and doesn't want to hear any nonsense. Knowing this would be his reaction was why I didn't tell him at first. I was on my own and thought I could live with it. A lot of people do. But things got worse. A week later, I was asleep in my bed when it felt like someone jumped on me, knocking the air out of my lungs. I couldn't move. My arms and legs were pinned by this invisible force on top of me. Panic starts to set in. I cannot get a deep breath, slowly feeling like I am suffocating. I thrash my head from side to side. A female voice so close to my face I could actually feel the breath from each word says coldly, "Leave him alone. He's mine." Finally, I am released and lay there taking deep breaths of life-giving oxygen. Shaking, I get up, put on my house coat, and sneak out of the bedroom without waking Jerry. Going to my suitcase, I open a secret side pocket to get a cigarette and lighter out. Carefully opening a squeaky door, I go out into the front porch and light up. I inhale, letting the tobacco smoke calm my nerves. Jerry doesn't know I smoke and would not approve, but I'll only do it under extreme circumstances, and this qualified as one of those times. 10 days later, while putting boxes in the barn for storage, I hear the raspy voice say again, "You're so pretty." Not knowing what else to do, I yell at it to leave me alone. And then the voice laughs, as if taking pleasure from my fear. My skin crawls. I hear chains rattling, and what sounds like someone whimpering. I followed the noises to a spot in front of the back wall where there are rusty chains hanging from the ceiling, reaching down about 5 feet from the floor. Even though I could hear chimes from the chains knocking into each other, they weren't moving. I hear the whimpering again. Sounds like a girl standing right in front of me. And then that horrid laugh follows. That got me, and I ran out of there lickety-split. Enough was enough. What the hell is going on here? The next day, I venture into the small town of Red Bluff and check out the library to do a little research. Their archives still used microfiche. Been so long, the librarian had to give me a crash course on how to use the machine. I started at the newspaper's beginning and moved my way up through the years. There were no search engines. I had to read each newspaper looking for any information. Lucky for me, it had only been a weekly publication. While scanning one from 1933, there was an article that talked about missing girls from town aging from 16 to 20 years old, going back 15 years. A total of 11 had disappeared. That was unusual for a small town. I filed the information away in my head and kept reading. Then I found something in a 1945 copy. It was front page news with a picture of a man in handcuffs being led away by two police officers, with what looks like our cabin in the background. I read on. His name was Fred Simon Schmidt, and he was being arrested for murdering the missing girls. According to the story, a girl who had been hitchhiking got a lift from Mr. Schmidt and claims he took her to his cabin and chained her up in the barn. She only escaped by breaking her fingers to get loose. Also accuses his wife, Dorothy Edwards Schmidt, of knowing she was there and not stepping in to help. Our cabin used to be their home. I couldn't believe it. Driven to learn more, I pulled the next newspaper and it is still headline news. A court date had been set and both Wayne Schmidt and his wife were being charged with murder. The prosecution had no hard evidence, only the witness who had escaped. No bodies had been found, and there was no evidence at the cabin to show the missing girls were ever there. The newspaper was obviously on the defendant's side. It stated Mr. Schmidt was on the board of the Founding Fathers. The article went on to describe the Schmidts as good, hardworking citizens. It listed the charities they supported, explaining since they cared, they could not possibly be cold-blooded killers. I rolled my eyes. The defense made the victim, who had escaped, sound like a bad girl, writing she was a homeless drunk that hitchhiked from town to town, making money by not the most honest of means, so her word could not be trusted. The trial went on for 2 weeks before the headlines showed a picture of the Schmidts walking down the court steps hand in hand with triumphant smiles. Innocent, the words screamed out. Any mention of them again would be 4 years later. They were still worthy of front page news as it read, Mr. Schmidt falls off a ladder in barn and breaks his neck. I thought to myself, talk about karma. Now, Mrs. Schmidt, it's weird because she would be discovered missing 7 years later. No one in town had seen her in a month, and she had missed several church meetings before someone decided to check on her. The whole house, barns, and land had been searched. She was never found. Because they did not have children, the house became the town's property due to unpaid taxes. The house nor the Schmidts were not mentioned again until 1984. An article hints the property could be haunted, stating reports of teens sneaking up there to hang out and later reporting weird happenings such as voices, screams, and strange lights. The last article I could find was when the city put the cabin for auction in 1998. I leaned back in the chair and let all the information slowly digest. To think our home might have been a slaughterhouse made my stomach churn. After doing a little research on the paranormal, I came up with two possible conclusions. Either my house was haunted by the Schmidts and their victims, or it was a residual haunting, which is like a recording of events. I believe it was a little bit of both. After 2 years of putting up with this paranormal invasion into my life, I finally convinced Jerry to move back into the city and use the cabin as a summer getaway. Whether or not he ever experienced anything abnormal, he never said, but I doubt he ever admitted it. To this day, whenever we visit the place, I still hear the voices. Every town has that empty house. I'm sure most don't have ghosts floating down the halls, but that doesn't stop the stories surrounding them. Here's how this story started. Just turning 12 years old meant it was my last Halloween to go trick-or-treating. I was excited because it was the first time my parents were allowing my friends and me to go without any adult supervision. With the rules to stay within 3 blocks of the neighborhood, we set off. After hitting every house we could, we walked aimlessly back to my home. Passing by an old house, I was surprised to see lit jack-o'-lanterns lining the sidewalk leading up to the dark porch. There were no lights on. It had been empty and for sale as far back as I could remember. No one seemed to really be taking care of the place, so it was kind of run down. The pumpkin's flickering lights gave the shadows life, giving the house a really creepy look. None of us could recall if anyone had moved in. Being boys, we dared each other to go up to the door and knock. To be honest, no one really wanted to do it, but none of us wanted to be labeled a coward, so we walked slowly up the sidewalk and onto the porch. I got pushed forward. Fine, I'll knock. Barely tapping the door, I hold my breath, praying no one will answer. We all jumped back when the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a man wearing a pumpkin head. Man, were we speechless, just standing there with our mouths hung open. Somebody had to do something, so I croak out, "Trick or treat?" He hands out candy bars, the big size ones. I'm telling you, I had to make myself walk down the steps and sidewalk instead of running, which is what I really wanted to do. It was so creepy. One could feel it in the air. The next morning, I tell my mom somebody has moved into the house. Later that evening, when Dad came home, They both questioned me about trick-or-treating at the empty house and asked could I have been mistaken. I said no way. Someone in a costume was giving out candy. Come to find out, no one was supposed to be there, and it had a lock that only the realtor had a key to. So the mystery was, who was the person in costume, and how did he unlock the door? Something weird was up with the whole thing. I stayed clear of the place after that. It's been a few years, but every Halloween there are some who brave it and go knocking on that door with the hopes of seeing the Pumpkin Man.